The forest welcomed the lone hiker. Its canopy, a vibrant tapestry of emerald and gold, swayed gently in the breeze. Sunlight filtering through the leaves painted dancing patterns on the forest floor. The air, crisp and cool, hummed with the music of nature. Our hiker, drawn by the serenity of the wilderness, breathed deeply, savouring the tranquility. Each step forward was a step closer to peace, a retreat from the cacophony of civilization. The hiker, an experienced outdoorsman, moved with quiet confidence. Years of exploring the wild had instilled a deep respect for nature's embrace. He had sought solace in the wilderness before, finding comfort in its solitude. This forest, however, held a different kind of magic. It was ancient, its trees standing as silent sentinels to countless seasons. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor, the hiker made camp. With practiced ease he pitched his tent near a babbling brook. A fire, crackling merrily, soon provided warmth and a sense of security. The aroma of roasting venison filled the air, a savoury reward at the end of a long day. As darkness enveloped the forest, the hiker settled into his sleeping bag, lulled by the symphony of the night. Nightfall in the forest brought a different kind of beauty. The vibrant colours of the day gave way to muted hues of silver and grey. Stars, hidden by day, twinkled brilliantly against the velvet canvas of the night sky. The forest, no longer bathed in sunlight, took on an air of mystery, its secrets hidden in the shadows. The hiker, captivated by the celestial display, lay awake for a while, lost in contemplation. The silence of the night was profound, broken only by the gentle murmur of the brook and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was a silence that amplified every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. The hiker, accustomed to the sounds of the wilderness, found comfort in the rhythm of the night. Sleep, when it finally came, was deep and dreamless. The first scream, when it pierced the stillness, startled the hiker awake. It was a high-pitched, blood-curdling sound, filled with terror and pain. It seemed to come from somewhere deep within the forest, echoing through the trees. The hiker, heart pounding in his chest, sat up abruptly, listening intently. He strained to hear over the frantic beating of his own heart. The fire had died down to embers, casting flickering shadows that danced on the walls of his tent. He couldn't tell if the scream was human or animal, but it sent a shiver down his spine. The second scream came almost immediately after the first. It was even closer this time, closer than it should have been. The hiker scrambled out of his tent, grabbing his flashlight and fumbling for his knife. Adrenaline surged through him, urging him to both flee and investigate. He shone his flashlight into the darkness, but the beam couldn't penetrate far into the dense undergrowth. He listened intently, every sense on high alert. The forest, once peaceful, now felt menacing, full of unseen dangers. The hiker, his breath catching in his throat, waited for the sound to repeat, but the forest had fallen silent again. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but the only sound was the pounding of his own heart. Doubts began to creep in. Had he imagined the screams? Was it just a fox or a coyote? He knew wild animals made unsettling noises, especially at night. Trying to rationalize, the hiker convinced himself that his fear had exaggerated the sounds. He was a seasoned outdoorsman, not a novice frightened by the sounds of the night. Taking a deep breath, he tried to calm his racing pulse. He returned to his tent, his senses still on edge. Sleep, however, eluded him. Every rustle of leaves, every crackle of the dying fire sent a jolt of fear through him. He lay there, staring into the darkness, listening for any sign that the screams might return. The silence was deafening. As the first rays of dawn touched the forest, the hiker felt a wave of relief wash over him. The rising sun seemed to chase away the shadows and fears of the night. He stepped out of his tent, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The forest, bathed in the soft golden light of dawn, seemed peaceful again. He built a new fire and cooked breakfast, trying to shake off the unease that lingered from the night. The screams, he told himself, were just animals. There was no need to be afraid. He would continue his hike as planned, enjoying the beauty of the forest. As he ate, he tried to convince himself that he had imagined the terror of the previous night. However, as he packed his gear, a sense of unease continued to gnaw at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The forest, once welcoming, now seemed to watch him, its silence heavy with unspoken secrets. He tried to ignore the feeling, attributing it to his lack of sleep. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. He decided to change his route, opting for a path that followed a nearby river. The sound of rushing water, he reasoned, would be comforting, a reminder that he was not alone. He set off at a brisk pace, hoping to put as much distance as possible between himself and the screams that had haunted his night. Section 5. Shadows of Doubt. The river, a ribbon of silver winding through the forest, did little to ease the hiker's growing unease. The further he hiked, the denser the forest became. The trees pressed in on either side of the path, their branches intertwining overhead, blocking out the sun. The air grew heavy and still, thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The hiker felt a constant prickle of unease on the back of his neck, as if he was being watched. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, that the forest itself was holding its breath. He stopped frequently, listening for any unusual sounds, his hand hovering near the knife sheathed at his belt. As dusk approached, the hiker found a clearing and decided to make camp early. He couldn't face another night listening to the sounds of the forest, dreading the possibility of hearing those screams again. He built a fire, hoping the flames would provide some measure of comfort and protection. As darkness fell, the forest came alive with sounds. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a jolt of fear through him. He sat by the fire, his senses on high alert, his mind replaying the screams over and over again. He knew he couldn't stay there forever, but the thought of venturing back into the darkness filled him with dread. The next morning, the hiker decided to seek answers. He packed his gear and set off, not towards civilization, but deeper into the forest. He needed to understand the source of his fear, to rationalize the screams that had haunted him. He told himself he was being foolish, but a part of him was drawn to the mystery, compelled to uncover the truth. As he hiked, he noticed something he had missed before. Scattered amongst the trees were remnants of the past. A rusted tin can, a shattered piece of pottery, a weather-beaten boot. These were not natural artifacts, but signs of human presence, long faded. The hiker's unease deepened. Who else had walked these woods, and what had become of them? He came to a small clearing, and there, nestled among the trees, he found it, a dilapidated cabin, its wooden walls blackened with age and decay. The windows were boarded up, and the door hung precariously from its hinges. An air of sadness, of forgotten lives, clung to the place. The hiker approached cautiously, his hand hovering over his knife. He called out, his voice echoing eerily in the silence, but there was no response. The cabin stood empty, a testament to a time long past. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The interior of the cabin was dark and dusty, lit only by slivers of sunlight that pierced through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The air was thick with the smell of decay and the musty scent of things long forgotten. A few pieces of furniture remained, a rickety table, a couple of chairs, a bed frame with a sagging mattress. On the table the hiker found a leather-bound journal, its pages brittle with age. He picked it up carefully and blew off the dust. The journal's pages contained faded ink, the handwriting spidery and difficult to decipher. He sat down on the dusty floor and began to read. The journal belonged to a man who had lived in the cabin with his family many years ago. He wrote of his love for the forest, his joy in raising his children in the wilderness, far from the troubles of the world, but the entries soon took on a darker tone. The man wrote of a growing unease, the sense of being watched, of strange occurrences in the night. He described hearing screams, the same blood-curdling screams that had haunted the hiker. As the hiker read, he felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The journal entries ended abruptly, leaving the mystery unresolved. What had happened to the family who had lived here? Had they met with foul play, their screams echoing through the trees, or had something else driven them away? The hiker spent the rest of the day searching the cabin and the surrounding woods, but he found no further clues. As dusk approached, he reluctantly abandoned his search and made camp a safe distance from the cabin. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that the forest itself was closing in on him. As darkness fell, the screams began again, closer this time, filled with an anguish that chilled him to the bone. He huddled by his fire, his back against a tree, his knife clutched tightly in his hand. He knew now that the screams were not just animals, but something far more sinister. They were the cries of the dead, their agony echoing through the trees, their stories etched into the very fabric of the forest. He thought about the journal entries, the man's growing fear, his sense of being watched. He thought about the abandoned cabin, the remnants of a life cut short. He realized that he was not alone in this forest. It was a place of deep sorrow, a place where the past refused to die. Sleep eluded him that night. He sat by the fire, listening to the screams, his fear a living thing, coiling around him like a serpent. He knew then that he had to leave, to escape the clutches of this haunted place. As dawn approached, he packed his gear and fled.